Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi. Saya Fahmi Izzuddin dan ini Niaga Awani. Dan seperti biasa di Niaga Awani akan bawakan kepada anda segala bentuk perkembangan mengenai bisnes, ekonomi dan kewangan, tempatan serta antarabangsa. Dan pada jam ini kita ingin melihat kepada satu perkembangan di mana Rizab Persekutuan Amerika Syarikat, The Fed, tidak akan menaikkan kadar faedah buat kali pertama dalam tempoh lebih setahun pada mesyuarat 13 dan 14 Jun. Menurut ahli ekonomi yang ditinjau oleh Reuters, namun sebahagian ahli ekonomi menjangkakan sekurang-kurangnya satu lagi kenaikan tahun ini lantaran ekonominya kekal berdaya tahan. Pengerusi The Fed Jerome Powell memberi isyarat pada Mei bahawa bank pusat itu mungkin akan menghentikan kitaran kenaikannya tidak lama lagi untuk menilai kesan pengetatan dasar monetari pada setiap mesyuarat sejak Mac 2022. Namun persoalannya, apa impaknya kepada Malaysia? Dan untuk mengulas lanjut isu ini, kita bersama dengan Muhammad Zafri Zulkifli, pakar ekonomi MIDF Research. Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi Zafri.
Waalaikumsalam Fahmi.
Baik, mungkin kita mulakan dengan apa mungkin jangkaan MIDF mengenai dasar monetari Amerika Syarikat yang dijangka bersidang pada minggu hadapan.
Setelah menaikkan kadar pinjaman sebanyak 500 mata daripada 0.25 ketika pandemik dan dinaikkan sehingga 5.25%. Kini inflasi Amerika Syarikat sudah sedikit menurun ke 4.7%, masih tinggi berbanding dengan the target range of 2%. Struktur pekerjaan di Amerika Syarikat juga masih kuat. Jadi ada kemungkinan Bank Pusat Amerika Syarikat akan terus menaikkan kadar pinjaman. Namun mengambil kira risiko krisis perbankan di Amerika Syarikat dan perkembangan ekonomi dunia yang semakin menurun. Jadi kami berpandangan Amerika Syarikat ataupun khususnya the Federal Reserve akan mengekalkan kadar pinjaman pada 5.25% dan tidak akan menaikkan kadar pinjaman ini.
Ya, dan itu jangkaan jika tidak ada kenaikan. Namun mungkin saya kira orang di luar sana mungkin ada yang kurang faham dengan konsep ini dan sebagainya. Apakah kesan dasar monetari Amerika Syarikat ini terhadap nilai ringgit dan situasi inflasi di Malaysia khususnya, Zafri?
Baik, apabila Bank Pusat Amerika Syarikat mengekalkan kadar pinjaman ini dan ini akan memberikan kesan kepada nilai dolar index. Nilai dolar akan menguncup dan secara tidak langsung akan memberikan kesan kepada nilai mata wang asing. Antaranya adalah Malaysia. Dan Malaysia seperti kita tahu sebuah negara yang bergantung kepada perdagangan antarabangsa akan menerima manfaat ini, dan kekuatan ekonomi domestik negara yang terus berkembang didorong oleh perkembangan baik dari sudut pekerjaan dan kadar inflasi yang makin agak menurun. Ini akan terus mendorong mengukuhkan lagi kekuatan domestik ekonomi negara. Dan lagi satu faktor adalah Malaysia sebagai pengeluar minyak dan gas dan juga kelapa sawit akan terus menerima manfaat daripada harga pasaran yang masih kita panggil elevated, masih tinggi berbanding dengan pra-pandemik, iaitu jadi ia akan memberi kesan positif kepada nilai mata wang ringgit. Jadi kita menjangkakan nilai mata wang ringgit akan mengukuh khususnya selepas mesyuarat the Federal Reserve yang akan datang.
Ya. Dan bagaimana pula dengan kadar OPR? Dan kerana kita tahu ini antara perkara yang memangnya menjadi isu atau mungkin sentimen dalam kalangan rakyat. Adakah perlu dinaikkan atau sebaliknya, Zafri?
Penting untuk kita terangkan dulu. OPR, dasar monetari OPR, dasar monetari Bank Negara tidak hanya melihat kepada prestasi ringgit, Bank Negara mengambil kira risiko ataupun perkembangan pertumbuhan domestik, perkembangan domestik. Ini menjadi teras utama Bank Negara. Melihat kepada keadaan domestik ekonomi negara yang dijangka akan berkembang pada kadar yang lebih perlahan berbanding dengan tahun lepas. Jadi kami menjangkakan Bank Negara akan mengekalkan kadar OPR ini pada 3%. Dan Fahmi, kadar OPR ini adalah sama dengan kadar OPR pada sebelum pandemik, iaitu 2019. Jadi kalau dinaikkan ke 3.25%, ia akan memberikan kesan kepada prestasi pertumbuhan ekonomi negara, khususnya dari sudut perbelanjaan runcit, perbelanjaan bisnes dan juga dari sudut investment. Jadi jadi mengambil kira semua pandangan, faktor-faktor ini, kami menjangkakan pihak negara akan terus mengekalkan kadar OPR ini pada 3.00 pada tahun ini.
Ya, baik. Dan semestinya ada keterhubungan di antara langkah yang bakal dilakukan oleh The Fed ini dengan keputusan oleh Bank Negara, dan kita juga menunggu keputusan mesyuarat The Fed nanti yang akan berlangsung pada 13 hingga 14 Jun ini untuk melihat apa langkah yang diambil oleh mereka. Dan terima kasih saya ucapkan kepada Muhammad Zafri Zulkifli, pakar ekonomi MIDF Research, di atas perkongsian itu sebentar tadi. Dan untuk itu kita perlu berhenti berehat seketika dan terus bersama kami di Niaga Awani. Pelbagai lagi perkembangan menarik berkenaan dengan seterusnya kita ingin pergi ke satu perkembangan di Perhimpunan UN Habitat di Nairobi, Kenya, bakal menutup tirai pada Jumaat, di mana tumpuan rumah mampu milik dan bandar mampan menjadi fokus utama peserta dari serata dunia. Editor Astro Zulfitri Yusof ada perinciannya.
Hari ini merupakan hari terakhir penganjuran Perhimpunan UN Habitat sesi kedua yang diadakan di Kompleks Pertubuhan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu di Gigiri, Nairobi, Kenya ini, di mana selama 5 hari mereka bermesyuarat, berbincang dan juga merangka resolusi yang akhirnya akan dimuktamadkan dan dipersetujui menjelang tengah hari ini. Antara beberapa resolusi yang telah dibincangkan dan juga ditetapkan ialah berkaitan dengan perumahan mampu milik. Selain itu, turut dibincangkan ataupun dirangka ialah mengenai garis panduan antarabangsa berkaitan dengan smart city ataupun bandar pintar yang berteraskan kepada masyarakat ataupun rakyat secara keseluruhannya. Selain itu, resolusi juga yang dijangka akan dipersetujui ialah berkaitan dengan World Cleanup Day. Selain daripada bagaimana matlamat ataupun agenda matlamat pembangunan lestari ataupun SDG itu mampu diterapkan di peringkat akar umbi, localizing the SDG. Perkara-perkara itu akan dijadikan satu ketetapan dan juga dipersetujui oleh ahli-ahli anggota di dalam UN Habitat, di mana sekaligus ini akan menjadi satu garis panduan di pelbagai peringkat, baik di peringkat negara, di peringkat serantau dan juga di peringkat PBT, di mana ianya akan menjadi garis panduan dan juga jadi teladan ataupun menjadi petunjuk untuk urbanisasi ataupun perbandaran yang lebih baik di masa akan datang. Perincian lanjut akan saya bawakan dalam buletin yang seterusnya. Sekian sahaja laporan saya untuk Niaga Awani pada hari ini. Terus sahaja bersama dengan rakan setugas. Terima kasih kepada Emirates kerana sudi memberikan kerjasama kepada Astro Awani yang memberikan dan juga membenarkan kami melakukan liputan sepanjang penganjuran UN Habitat Assembly di Kenya ini. Terus saja bersama rakan setugas di studio.
Baik, perkembangan seterusnya, Simposium Sasana BNM 2023 yang berlangsung pada Khamis menjadi wacana intelektual yang dihoskan oleh Bank Negara Malaysia. Acara sehari itu bertujuan untuk mempromosikan perbincangan bermakna mengenai isu-isu utama dan pembaharuan yang diperlukan untuk ekonomi Malaysia. Ia menampilkan pakar dan pemimpin pemikir dalam ekonomi sektor kewangan, kemampanan, melibatkan pelbagai topik berangkumi soal ringgit, dasar monetari, pendigitalan, jaringan keselamatan sosial, kewangan Islam dan kemampanan. Editor Najib Arif berkunjung ke simposium tersebut untuk melihat aspek tentang kod QR rentas sempadan.
Welcome to Niaga Awani with me, Najib Arif. We are here at the Sasana Kijang for the Sasana Symposium 2023. A lot have been discussed since this morning, and of course, one of the things that being focused this morning is about the official launch of the basically the QR code payment linkages between Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and also Singapore by the Governor of Bandar this morning. And joining us this morning for this session is Kaiser Iskandar Anwaruddin, Director of Payment Services Policy, Department Bandar negara Malaysia. Alright, Mr. Kaiser, help us to understand how does the implementation of the QR code payment linkages enhance basically the efficiency and also and convenience for cross-border transactions between these countries, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and also Indonesia.
Thank you, Najib, for the question. So I think fundamentally what we've wanted to achieve is have the convenience of domestic payments in the cross-border space. Many of us know that cross-border payments can be a hassle. It has been known to be quite costly because the exchange rates could be high. There's lack of transparency. You don't know whether or not there are any hidden fees, and there are also instances where it is not that timely. So with that in mind, what we've wanted to achieve with the cross-border QR payment linkages is something which is convenient, instantaneous, simple, and cheaper as well. So convenience. So what I mean by convenience is basically you can just simply use your existing mobile application, which you use domestically to scan Do It Now QR, then go abroad to the likes of Singapore, Indonesia, and Thailand to also scan there and make payments for purchases there. So that's the first from the perspective of convenience. Secondly, in terms of timeliness, what happens here is that once you scan and agree to the transfer, the payment is made immediately, so the amount is immediately deducted from your account. At the same time, the merchant in Singapore, for example, receives the money in their account immediately as well. When it comes to transparency, I think if we look at once you scan the QR code, what you will immediately know is who you are going to pay to, the exchange rate that you are charged for that purchase, as well as the amount of ringgit that is going to be deducted from your account. So basically, it is about bringing cheaper, faster, and more seamless payment transactions domestically into the cross-border space.
I'm going to touch about the fees and also the security aspect after this, but let's talk about the challenges of implementing in the first stage of the QR payment, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges you can share, and how do Bank Negara basically, and also Indonesia, Thailand, and also Singapore, overcome this?
Okay. Perhaps I can mention 3 challenges. I think the first one would be surrounding getting buy-in from the key stakeholders, getting the commitment, especially since this is a resource-intensive exercise and requires strong commitment. Secondly would be surrounding the timing. We actually started work in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, so many banks were quite focused on other initiatives at that point in time. The third challenge I would say is surrounding managing the differences in rules and regulations, the differences in the payment systems across the different countries. So to address these challenges, I think we were guided by 3 principles. The first one surrounded having a strong value proposition. We were keen to bring, as I mentioned earlier, seamless, cheaper, faster payments in the domestic space into the cross-border space. At the same time, these would bring
reports and the predictions. But all of the ASEAN countries still monitor air quality on a national level and base their alerts on their national methodologies. So because they all follow their national methodologies, the air quality index can really differ quite dramatically. So for example, between Singapore and JB, right next to each other, but you would have air quality index which are drastically different. This gives a very confusing message to the public.
Suraya ada online,
uncertainty. And so I would say that a uniform index would be really helpful to make cooperation and coordination across ASEAN easier. The second thing that I think we should really look into is the need for a haze coordination center. So similar to ASEAN, ASEAN has a coordination center for humanitarian disaster, which is called the AHA Center. And this has been something that's been going on for a long time. The ASEAN Haze Center was put in place, the requirement for it was put into place during the agreement, but has not been actually existing yet. So it's really important for us to push forward on this so that we have a dedicated center in ASEAN to really address the haze issues and coordinate for the region.
Thank you for that, sharing that, Dr. Helena. Truly important for us to coordinate efforts so that everything happens in a consolidated manner. Moving along deeper into the next area, Dr. Helena. Now, haze impacts the lives of average Malaysians. Breathing and health issues for school-going children, working Malaysians, those who are medically vulnerable, to, of course, wider industrial disruptions in the local and regional economy. This includes aviation, tourism, agriculture. What public policy mechanisms, in your opinion, can be most effective in preventing yet another major haze event from occurring?
Okay, so for Malaysia's side, it's really important for the government to promote responsible corporate behavior among Malaysian companies, regardless where they're operating. So, for example, we always hear when there is haze, Indonesia will say that Malaysian companies are among those identified as being linked to the forest fires in Indonesia. And this can become a problem because it will become a source of diplomatic spats. It will make it difficult for our government to communicate and coordinate in a cordial manner with Indonesia. So there's definitely been great improvement since the early days of the haze, where companies would intentionally burn land. I believe this is very rarely happening now. But it's still important for the Malaysian government to develop mechanisms to monitor and cross-check Malaysian companies' practices, even when abroad. So currently, we don't really have such cross-jurisdictional practices in place. So it's basically sort of our word against theirs. The intention does not necessarily need to be to catch out these companies, but we need to have a system whereby Malaysia can confidently verify and ensure that Malaysian companies are not contributing to the problem. And this way, we can move forward more effectively with actually proceeding to solve the problem in a coordinated manner.
Absolutely. Malaysian first, and then, of course, we can also have a better consolidated opinion on how regional partners are also working within the same arena. One last area, Dr. Helena, and now any policy lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic experience that could be effective in the event of another haze crisis, which is also, in a sense, a public health emergency, considering the number of people who are not only take ill, but are forced to stay indoors, and, of course, the wider economic impacts.
Yeah, so definitely the COVID-19 experience is definitely something we can learn from. A good first lesson to be applied is the supply of masks. So during COVID-19, the government was quite good in ensuring that our mask supplies were adequate and also, importantly, reasonably priced. So for haze, the correct mask to use is the N95 mask, and this is the type of mask we can filter out the tiny particles of haze. But this kind of masks are more expensive than the surgical masks. So in past haze events, there's been N95 shortages as well as overpricing of this mask. So it's important now that the government can apply similar measures to what they used during COVID to avoid this kind of shortages or price hikes to happen again. The second thing is that just like COVID, during haze, one of the strategies is to get students and also working adults to work from home. So we do have, the COVID experience has taught us and prepared us how to work from home and how to study from home. These systems were, I think, pretty well implemented during COVID. So now we see that most government and private offices and schools already have the systems in place. So I think in a future haze event, if we do have something really serious, hopefully there will be less concern, less hesitation if haze emergencies are required to be declared in the interest of public health. So because of this, hopefully we will have less or minimal disruption to our work as well as to our studies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helena. Very insightful. And now it's time for a quick break. Stay with us, though, and we'll be right back here with Niaga Spotlight.
Stres juga kan? Bila nak stream tengok movie atau bola kat rumah, internet tak kencang, lagging sana sini. Sebab itulah setiap rumah perlukan router Wi-Fi 6 Astro Fiber. Walaupun lebih 10 peranti bawah satu bumbung, router Wi-Fi 6 Astro Fiber ni sangat powerful. Router Wi-Fi 6 ni 3 kali lebih kencang daripada Wi-Fi 5. Tadi kita cakap pasal bola kan? Gol! Liga Malaysia sekarang dah ada dekat Astro. Ada satu bandar jimat. 50 Mbps fiber dengan Astro dan Liga Malaysia hanya RM149.99 saja sebulan. Tawaran ni terhad tau. Dapatkan sekarang sebelum direbut orang. WhatsApp nombor ni sekarang.
Golongan berpendapatan tinggi atau T20 tidak akan lagi menerima sebarang subsidi.
Tidak akan ada lagi tambahan ataupun subsidi daripada kerajaan.
Kemungkinan berlakunya fenomena cuaca seperti gelombang haba yang berlarutan sehingga kini.
Harga gula tidak dinaikkan dan bekalan asas itu mencukupi di pasaran.
Gula untuk rakyat itu akan kita kekalkan.
Penyelewengan dana negara bernilai lebih 2.3 bilion ringgit.
Bagi membolehkan masyarakat memberikan pandangan berhubung cara tadbir urus negara yang baik.
Yang lebih penting ialah bersemangat untuk membangunkan negara kita.
Adalah untuk meningkatkan kualiti guru dari segi kelayakan akademik dan perkhidmatan pendidikan negara.
Ia juga tidak lari daripada hasrat kami di peringkat KPM.
Akan diputuskan dalam masa terdekat.
Laksanakan secara bersasar berdasarkan jumlah penggunaan elektrik mengikut kediaman.
Ikuti perkembangan terkini. Buletin Awani 12.30 hari.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. Moving on to future affairs. Today we are looking at shifting Malaysia's real estate paradigm. Now, housing in Malaysia has become increasingly unaffordable. A proven indicator supported by the United Nations and World Bank is the multiple median approach. This entails dividing median house prices by median annual household income. Thus, if a house costs more than 3 times the annual household income, it is considered an unaffordable home. So this has been the case, however, in Malaysia for the last 30 years. In 2020, median house price was 295,000 ringgit, while the median annual household income was roughly 62,000 ringgit. Now that year, the house price to income ratio was 4.72 times. According to the multiple median approach just mentioned, anything between 4.1 and 5.0 is considered seriously unaffordable. Now, in fact, in the recently released Deloitte Global 2023 Gen Z and Millennial Survey, 50% of Malaysian millennials and 45% of Malaysian Gen Z rated cost of living as their top concern, as they are living paycheck to paycheck. We now look at what it takes to shift Malaysia's real estate paradigm and make home ownership more accessible for the rakyat, particularly critical during the ongoing cost of living and inflation crisis. Joining me online now are Dr. Suraya Ismail, Director of Research at Khazanah Research Institute, and Saleha Yusuf, Executive Director and Regional Head of Research and Consulting with Nawawi Teelang Property Consultants. Thank you both for making time for us. Let's get started, and I would like to direct the first question to Dr. Suraya. Dr. Suraya, Malaysian housing by and large is car-centric. We've got low connectivity that comes with it, though, leading to an oversupply of new homes in unattractive areas. Plus, there's latest data from the National Property Information Centre, NAPIC, showing that in Q3 of 2022, there was an overhang of close to 30,000 units. 53% of these units were priced below 500,000 ringgit. What is this telling you, Dr. Suraya, about clear gaps in the price segment?
Oh, thank you, Tamina, and thank you very much for inviting me to give some responses to the current phenomenon that we are witnessing now. Let me just unbundle a little bit of the statistics that you gave me. So with the same NAPIC figure, we see that below 300,000, that was 24% of not being able to be sold. But from 300,000 to more than 1 million, that was about 76%. So if I peg my analysis on affordable housing at your median price that you mentioned before, it appears that the statistics are showing something which is contrary to what the statistics from NAPIC, when you slice it just 500,000 and below, because we had to slice it at 300,000 K and below. And therefore, the glut seems to be appearing at 300,000 and above types of property, which is about 76%. Now, I also want to give another statistic, which is in 2009, houses of 200,000 and below was 55% of supply, new supply, but now only 7.5% in 2002 are under 200,000 types of supply. So I think we have to look at this in its totality, whereby there is a low units in terms of affordable housing type of price range, and this has made people not demanding it, and we have a glut at 300,000 here and above. So I think that is important to look at as well.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for that, Dr. Sarai, because it really helps us to frame the entire conversation that we're having, looking at the fact there's that mismatch in the 300K and above. Now, Puan Saleha, interestingly, Johor and Penang, they happen to top the list of most overhang properties rather than what one might assume to be the Klang Valley. What are recommendations from your side for addressing this?
Thank you. If we look at overhang properties, I think for the benefit of the general audience, overhang properties are properties that are not sold after receiving certificate of completion and compliance. Okay, and then if we look at the breakdowns of the overhang units over the last 10 to 15 years, majority of these overhang units are launched between 5 to 10 years ago. For example, in Kuala Lumpur, 80% of the overhang units were launched in 5 to 10 years ago. And then in Selangor, about 51%. So the same numbers were recorded in Johor and Penang at 56% and 75%. So generally, these are very old properties. And then if we look at below 3 years, the number is very small. Overall, in Malaysia, it's only about 5.6% or 1,645 units. So basically, what we can imply from these numbers, today developers are more aware of the market demand and attuned to the market needs, so they are no longer developing like what has been done in the last 10 years. So I see this as a legacy issue which I think very unlikely to recur in the future. So in terms of recommendation, what do we need to do with about 18,000 units that have not been sold over the last 5 to 10 years? If we look at the number, most of them are below 500,000. So I think one immediate step that can be done is for developers to relook at the pricing. And I think moving forward, developers, I would suggest the local authority to require developers to conduct a proper market study to identify market demand within the particular area that they are going to develop.
Thank you very much for that. Moving along from there, Dr. Suraya, the average Malaysian now has too few options for becoming a homeowner. In fact, an alarming 52% of household debt was made up of housing loans, and this is according to a fairly dated 2017 Bank Negara report. How do we, Dr. Suraya, expand available options for the rakyat as cost of living burdens only continue rising?
Yes, this is a very important question because some certain quarters are proposing that we make, not expensive homes, non-affordable homes, 500,000, 600,000, seem affordable, quote unquote, by having innovative financing packages. The thing about innovative financing packages is that it lengthens your loan tenure to maybe 35 or 40 years. And it makes even a house that's 800,000 more affordable to you. So I think this is not a good thing to do to the rakyat by showing innovative or asking them to go into innovative financing schemes just to make expensive homes more affordable, quote unquote, because your monthly repayments are lower. But that makes you more financialized in your life. This is the financialization of your life where you have to really have a lot of debt. And that reduces your standard of living now with the high cost of living as well. So I think the most important step that one should take is to ensure that to begin with, all houses that are being supplied in the market must be at that affordable range. And then financing will be much better. Without a supply of affordable homes, we will all be indebted too much, as the data suggests.
Thank you for emphasizing the baseline. Saleha, now digging a little bit deeper, let's discuss addressing hidden costs of home ownership and underlying costs also that are available and there across the Malaysian property market. How can we perhaps prioritize home ownership first and reduce dependency on real estate as an investment in the meanwhile, while we seek to house and home more Malaysians?
Okay. One of the hidden costs in development is cross-subsidy. Okay, this happens when the government requires private developers to provide affordable homes in their residential development and also especially in large townships. So when developers are required to provide affordable homes, definitely there will be cross-subsidy because generally what developers would do, they push up the property prices of other products within the same development. So this has this unintended effect of raising the overall property prices, which then affects the affordability of the general population. So I think instead of pushing it to developers, what the government should do, they should take over the development of affordable homes like what has been done in Singapore. The provision of HDB units, which they started in the 1960s, and when they started during that time, they have already set a target of making sure 80% of their population would have their own homes. So otherwise, if everything is pushed to private developers, I think it will be quite difficult to achieve, for example, like by 2030 or something that we are going to do 10,000 affordable homes, because the business plans of the developers might not be in line with what the government aims to achieve. So otherwise, if the B40 or M40 market segment can afford to own properties, they would have no choice but to rent what generally we see in the market currently. So renting either from private investor or also from government entity. If we look at housing affordability, it is not a Malaysian problem, it is a global problem. Even if you look at one of the most developed countries like in the USA, currently housing affordability is at its lowest point in the history. In some of the cases, property prices have increased about 30% over the last few years. You need to have an income of about 7,500 per month US dollar to be the first home buyer. So it is very challenging. So there must be some other models in terms of provision of affordable homes. So I think what the government needs to do is to set more realistic targets. For example, targeting at every income level, what are the business models and financing models to ensure that every Malaysian can have a decent home either by owning or by renting.
Thank you, Puan Saleha, for emphasizing that. And also, of course, quite recently, the local government development minister, Now Koming, had also mentioned looking towards Singapore, perhaps, for a replicable model. Dr. Suraya, moving along now, the public housing model in Malaysia requires a total revamp in order to build truly inclusive, livable communities for our B40 and even M40 communities in the near future. Dr. Suraya, what would you say are the building blocks of this, including feasibility metrics to ensure accessibility and sustainability?
I tend to disagree with the point that the private sector should not build affordable housing, because consider counterfactual. So the private sector should build unaffordable housing. It doesn't make sense for any property market that you build housing that's not affordable. So I think there should be a clear demarcation or understanding what is affordable housing, which is affordable for all, and what is social housing, which is what is needed for those in poverty or those who are economically vulnerable, which is the PPR. That is social housing, that's public housing. That's not making housing generally affordable. So if you want to take the HDB model, it is not something that you can use for, do we have 80% of population who are in poverty or economically vulnerable? And at the same time, if you have land up to 90%, then maybe you can actually do that. But we have land in the hands of private developers, and they are, I think, responsible as well to ensure that you build houses for the people you have in this country and not for the people you aspire to have, which is those who are in the expensive brand range. And I actually don't, I want to see some figures on this cross-fertilization. I don't understand how a house that's 300K is not something feasible for a developer to do. That's point number one. And point number two, in terms of feasibility of social housing, because we're actually helping for social mobility, social housing is a different kettle of fish altogether. It is done by government. It is managed by government. Now, that is PPR. And most states, they are about 20% only. So this is where the state should take care of those who are economically vulnerable, 20%. But 80% should be covered by the private sector. If not, why do we have a private sector in a country? That is normal in all countries. Now, I beg to differ on the cities that we have mentioned in America, in New Zealand, and also in certain other countries. There are cities that have enjoyed affordability rates of 3%. But there are cities, yes, of course, who have affordability of 5%. But mind you, Malaysia is a young country. It has not developed like high-income countries. So why are we comparing to really developed markets to look at affordability measures? I think this is a very important point to make.
Thank you very much, Dr. Surai, for keeping it grounded in Malaysian economic realities as well. Puan Saleha, one last area for discussion. May I ask about looking at ways forward? What's the feasibility, in your opinion, of imposing vacancy tax to address the property overhang we previously referred to and these empty residential units?
Okay. Both vacancy tax and also tiered tax are two measures to dampen demand, okay? Especially during the peak of the property market where the market is more active among investors. If we look at vacancy tax, what it tries to do is to discourage or penalize those who own property and leave them vacant. But the issue is some of the investors are buying for leisure use or like holiday homes, and then it is not intended to leave vacant. But for this category, the percentage could be small, but as what you have seen generally in many of the commercial components, part of the development is service apartments and also high-rise development. So these are the units that are currently, I would say in general, high vacancy rate. So in this scenario, vacancy tax could be a measure to discourage buyers from buying and then leave it empty for a long time. Okay, tiered taxes are just like our income tax. The higher the income, the higher the tax rate. So in this case, for tiered taxes on property, the more property you own, the higher the property tax or the cost of home ownership. I think tiered taxes could be more favorable compared to vacancy tax, because vacancy tax, in many cases, some of the properties are not intended to buy and leave it vacant. So I don't think it's quite fair to punish all these investors who are buying, looking for capital gain in the future. So I would think tiered tax would be more feasible to dampen demand so that prices are kept in control.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Dr. Suraya and Puan Saleha, for making time for us on Niaga Spotlight. Truly appreciate your keen insight shared in so far. This has been Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. We'll see you next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.
I'm wondering what you make of all this, Dr. Rahima.
It is time for us to stop linking the suggestions for penalties.
Politicians are the most guilty of doing this.